So last time we talked about God's attributes, and we didn't quite finish it. We talked about what an attribute was and God's attributes of being and intellect. This time we're going to talk about his attributes of will. What attributes does God's uh, have because of his will? The chief attributes of God's will are freedom, omnipotence, and holiness. And because of his holiness, there are other, those are the fundamental attributes, but because of his holiness, he has others, could say secondary ones, if you want to call it that, of goodness, mercy, fidelity, veracity, and justice. And so we'll look at each of those. So the primary was freedom. God's infinite perfection is perfectly free. We talked about this again. Again, everything is interconnected. Everything we've said before, you'll find repeated. But again, we're looking at it from a different perspective. This time we're looking at it not to see that God exists, but to find out what God is by his nature, but because of his nature, what attributes he has. So we mentioned God's freedom. Being the first being, the cause of all causes, he he wasn't constrained by obedience. He didn't have to make us. There was no constraint upon him. He wasn't obliged to do it. He was perfectly free to do it, and he chose to do it. There was nothing greater than he was to force him to do it. So the very fact that he did it meant that he wanted us. So he wasn't forced by his own nature to perform any act because, again, he's perfectly free in every decision that he makes. And then mentioned also his omnipotence. When we talk about God's omnipotence, we say God can do all things. There's nothing hard or impossible for him. And that's true. That's an example of his omnipotence. To say God is omnipotent is the same as saying God is almighty. You can do all things. And God doesn't make any effort to accomplish this. It doesn't fatigue him. It's no effort on his part. It's simply an act of his will and his thought. That's all it takes as far as he's concerned. And he's not limited in the work that he can do. It's not a one-time thing. He can do the same thing over and over again if he wants. And he doesn't have to do it in pieces the way we do. The moment that he thinks it and wills it, it's done. Wholly formed, fully complete in every aspect. With God, to will something and to perform it are the same act. There is no separation. God's desire and his will, everything happens instantaneously. The two of them go together. His infinite perfection includes boundless power. Again, he's not limited in any way that he can do. And so he'll never be fatigued by all the work. He could create the whole universe, and he didn't need the day of rest. He didn't need it. The day of rest was there for our sakes, not that we needed it, but for us, for the future, as an example that should only work so long and then rest. Again, God's, and we'll see this again in one of these other things we're going to talk about. God always knows the future. Remember what we said last time. The future, the present, the past and the future are always present with him. There is no separation. He lives in the now. And so we indicate, again, another fundamental attribute of God's will is his holiness. And that we say that God is all holy. Holy. What does holiness consist of? How do you decide that something is holy? Holy is loving and willing what is good. Loving and willing what is good. So think about that for a second. Therefore, God has to be all holy because he is all that is good. And he wills only that what is good. And he loves all that is good because he loves himself and he is all good. He knows himself. He knows himself completely. No one will ever know him the way he knows himself. And knowing himself, he loves himself. And that's not like our self-love, selfish. His self-love is a giving self-love. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. One who has everything can only share. And he has everything in himself. He was totally complete. He didn't need us. And again, that's where that freedom comes in. He didn't need us. He chose to bring us into existence, to share that love. So the perfect love of God and the perfect willing of what God wills is perfect holiness. And therefore, God is all holy. As I say, he knows himself perfectly and he knows himself to be all perfect, all good, all loving. And he recognizes that perfection in himself. What? And that's not pride. That's humility. Humility is truth. And he sees that is a truth, that he is all of that, all loving, all perfect. He sees that as truth and recognizes and admits to it. It would be pride to say, I'm not. That would, that's false pride. And you find people like that sometimes in the world, say. So God's will is one with himself, and therefore he is the infinite willer of all that is good. Any good that you find in creation is a reflection of him. It wouldn't be good without him. He created it, and he used himself. Again, man was created in the image and likeness of God. We're a reflection of him, not his body, his soul. That because he doesn't have a body. As we said, he's all spiritual. So your soul is a reflection of what is in God, not your body. So God's holiness shows itself in those additional attributes. For example, his mercy towards creatures and his perfect justice when he deals with them. God's goodness is shown in his mercy in that he created us. Again, he didn't have to do it. That was a merciful act on his part to create us. Not only to create us, but to preserve us. And to give us all the benefits that we have. What kind of benefits? Life, health, grace, a chance to go to heaven. And God is merciful when he averts the evils that could befall us. And when he forgives penitent man his offenses. God is just, and his rewards and punishments are perfectly suited to the merits and demerits that he gains in his life. He is faithful to his promises. For example, he promised a redeemer, and he sent one. He promises us eternal life if we will fulfill his laws, and he does that. Everything that he says is true. It is impossible for him to lie. so everything that he reveals to us is true. So last time we looked at what an attribute was, and we studied how that was applied to God's perfections. And remembering that with God, with us, our attributes are distinct from us, from our essence, what we are. You may be, as a human being, you are a certain thing. You're a living, intelligent, thinking creature. But your attributes are separate from that. You can be a living, because we're all different in our attributes. There are people who are very good, and there are people who are liars, and there are people who are honest. Those are attributes, but they change from person to person. With God, all his attributes are part of his essence. They cannot be separated. We have studied them individually because there's no way we can study them completely and entirely. But you can see how they're all hooked together, that one thing depends upon another. So much of his attributes depends upon the fact that he is infinite, that he is necessary, that he is simple. And by that, remember, he's spiritual, he's only soul, he's not composed of parts. All of his, everything comes from that, but they're all parts of it. So with God, there is no distinction from his essence and his attributes. They're combined. But we have to look at them separately because we're human beings and our minds are limited. We can't conceive of it without separating things down into their parts. And we looked at God's attributes of his fundamental attributes, which were necessity. He's necessary for everything. Because he's the first, he's the creator of all. He's the first cause. We looked at his infinity, his unity, his simplicity, and spirituality. And then we looked at his attributes of being, which were eternity, ubiquity, another one of those nice words, which ubiquity means everywhere. God is everywhere. You can't separate him from anything. Everything is possessed inside of him. He's not separated into them. They're all part of him, everything. We are all part of him. This comes down to the mystical body, by the way. Again, as I say, that's a fundamental truth. You can't separate it, and the priests need to preach on it more often. If you can understand or even get an idea of what the mystical body is, you will have a much better idea of what your faith is and what God is. But again, so his immensity and his immutability, he can't change. And of his intellect, his knowledge and his wisdom. Remember, with knowledge is that you know what you know, and wisdom is applying it. With God, both are that's again combined. Everything God does, everything God knows, he uses perfectly. And man can't say the same thing. With us, the two are separate. There are many people who know a great deal and are total jerks as far as applying what they know. And then there are people who know very little but very good at using what they know. But with God, again, there's no separations. But and then there are also the secondary the attributes of will: freedom, omnipotence, holiness, goodness, mercy, justice, veracity, truthfulness, and fidelity. All of those things we covered today, briefly, but because we've covered them a lot more in the past, but we'll cover them more now in the arguments because people come up with arguments. So you tell me what you would say to someone who said this. If God is immutable, how is he free? Does not his immutability bind him in a motionless fixity in such a way that makes free activity impossible for him? If he's immutable, he can't change. Isn't that a rigidity? Isn't that there is no possibility for him to change? Doesn't that take away his freedom? What would you answer somebody like that?
I would say no, because he has almighty power.
Because he has almighty power and he chooses to use it. God is, again, remember, God is in the now. God is in eternal, and everything is present to him in this moment. He lives in this now, this eternal now. And there's no flow of events or objects that God needs to adapt himself to. He doesn't need to change. He knows in this moment everything is the same, and because he knows everything out there. He knows what will happen, what all the possibilities. It's already taken care of in this moment. He doesn't need to change. And all his decrees are eternal, and they're all free, perfectly free. Again, he's not conjoined to do anything. And being eternal, it can't be any conflict with his immutability because God knows every possible contingency. He lives in the now. As you say, he's all powerful. He knows what could possibly happen, and he's already taken care of it. He's already taken care of. The eternal, free, immutable decrees are made to meet every possible contingency in the most perfect manner, the best way possible. All right, how about this one? God created the world in time. The world is not eternal. So, how could God create in time if he is fixed in an eternal immutability? If he's fixed in the now, how can he create time? Again, it comes down to being all powerful, yes. But think about a little bit more than that. God from eternity decreed that the world would have a beginning at some point in time. He knew this from the very beginning. Again, he lives in the now. As I say, we see things past, present, and future. With him, they're all lined up like this, and he can go right down. All right, so at some point in time, I'm right there. I'm going to create the world. So he knows this in this present moment, and he knows all the possibilities that's going to happen from that. He can see the fall of man. He can see all the repercussions throughout the world, through history, through time, the ripples on the pond, how far they'll go. He sees the redemption of mankind. He sees the death of his son. He sees all of that right in the now. And so, but he decrees there's going to be a beginning point. At this point in time, I'm going to create man. The creation of man and the creation of time have to coincide because we're the ones who need time. He doesn't. The time is for us, not for him. He's outside of it. Again, it's a different dimension. Time is a dimension in itself. Ask the physicists, they can explain it to you. But time is a dimension in itself. So is space. God is outside of both of those. He's not part of it. So God decreed for time comes into being with creation. That's when time began. That's how we mark time. The beginning, BC, before Christ, goes all the way back, counts backwards to Adam and Eve. And if you want to go the evolutionist route, you can go billions of years back into who knows what. That slime, the all of a sudden just put forth life, whatever. But again, time counts. But you're counting backwards, but they were counting forwards. Adam and Eve were counting forwards. Time, it's creation, it's mankind, it's creatures that need, thinking creatures that need time, not God. So God's decree to create freely brought time into existence when he brought us into existence. There is nothing in this that conflicts with either divine freedom or with divine immutability, because the two are entirely different issues. The one concerns God alone, and the other concerns us. All right. Argument number 3. If God is immutable, he can't change, he's utterly changeless, how can my prayers make any difference? Don't tell me you haven't heard somebody say this. If God's decrees are from all eternity, how can they be affected by prayers offered in time? So, what do you say to somebody who says this?
Because he lives in the now and
He can hear your prayers.
He knows that you're going to pray to him, so.
He knew from all eternity that you were going to pray to him, yes. He knew that you were going to say these prayers. God's decrees need not be affected. God has prepared from eternity an answer to every prayer that can possibly be made, and such an answer is part of his eternal decrees. When he set it all up, when he set up creation, again, he saw the ripples. He knew all the things that would possibly happen, all the contingencies, all the possibilities, and he already had prepared for them. He knew who would pray, what they would pray for, what they would need, how he would answer them. But the prayers must be offered. How else then can he give an answer? If you don't ask, how can he answer? He knew that you would pray and he knew what his answer would be. But if you don't ask the question or if you don't say the prayer, he can't answer you. So you have to pray. Prayer is a necessity. Prayer is so necessary that I can't remember how many quotes in scripture there are, even just our Lord telling you to pray. Ask and you will receive. Teaching you the Our Father. This one can't be driven out except by prayer and penance. Pray always. How many times? I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. Our Lord constantly reiterated in his 3 years of public life to pray, to pray, to pray. Our prayers make a difference, a great difference. They make all the difference. There is an eternal answer waiting every petition, but that petition has to be made. There is no prayer that man can offer to God that God has not foreknown and for which he has not failed to prepare an answer. It's impious and flippant to say, there's no use praying, everything's fated and fixed. It's not fated and fixed. He gave you a free will. You can ask or not ask. You can do or not do. The fact that he knows what you're going to do or not do does not change the fact that you have free will, which will which is another argument that people will have. Just for example, Our Lady, when she appeared to St. Catherine Labouré and gave her the miraculous medal. Now, you've all seen the medal. You've seen Our Lady's hands are down like this, and there's rays coming out from her hands. Now, when she appeared to Catherine with the ring around her, showing what this is the way the medal was to be constructed, some of those rays were dark. Most of them were bright. Some of them were bright, but there were some dark rays, kind of like like fluorescent light bulbs, and some of them were out. You know, and so Catherine asked her, "Why are some of the rays dark?" And Our Lady answered her. She said, "Those are graces that I have to give, but nobody asks for them." Remember that Our Lady is the mediatrix of all graces. All the graces come from God, but they come through her. So, I mean, the Protestants will say, yeah, she doesn't have any graces to give. God made her the medium through which he gives graces. Yes, he merited all those graces on Calvary, but he chose to send them through her. She has those graces to pass on, let's put it that way, to pass on from him. But people don't think that she can do it, or they don't just forget, or they will not ask. It comes down to this. You have to pray. You have to ask for it. God will give it. He's already prepared it. But if you don't ask for it, he can't give it to you because you're denying him. So, okay, next one. God is omnipotent. He can do all things. Can God make a square circle? Can God make a rock so heavy you can't lift it? Can God make an object that is entirely black also entirely white? Can God utter a truth that is false or a lie that is true? The one about the square circle, I've heard lots of people, refer to that one. Usually in colleges, college kids who think they know everything, college professors who kind of want them to think that they do know everything. So, can God make a square circle? What was your answer to that? Come on. Is there such a thing as a square circle?
Because he made it that way. That's how he chose to make it.
Yeah. Yes. So we know what a square is, and we know what a circle is. They're two entirely different things. If you take a circle, if you take a square and make it into a circle, what is it now? It's a circle. It's no longer a square. It's a contradiction. When you take something, let's say, um, a good example they gave in the book was, all right, you have a blackboard and you make the circle on the blackboard, and then you erase it, but you erase it completely that you can't even tell that it was ever written on there. And then you point to it and say, what is that? Well, what is that? It's nothing. It's nothing. The answer would say, what? What's what? Because there's nothing there anymore. You've taken it away. That's what a contradiction is. It's a zero. It's a nothing. It's something cannot contradict itself without totally wiping itself out. And so certainly God can do all things, but these questions are actually not questions, they're denials. They're contradictions. Two things that negate one another or cancel each other out and become a nothing, a zero. If God could do the unthinkable and could create contradictions, then he would not be all perfect. Think about that. If God could do that, and that's an impossibility, he would not be perfect, all perfect, because God cannot contradict himself. By performing contradictions, it would be to assert a lack of power on God's part. And that would be a contradiction. To assert perfection it would be it would be a contradiction to his perfection, because again, there's nothing missing in God. So, I mean, lawyers will refer to those kind of things as fallacies, things that contradict each other. You throw them out. If you were in mathematics and you were trying to prove a theorem in geometry, it's a logical process, and that's what we've been doing here with apologetics, is going through a same logical process. When something contradicts the other, you throw it out. The same thing here. Things cannot contradict. If they do, you have to toss them out, because then it becomes null and void. So this is not the denial of omnipotence. It's an assertion of his omniscience, that he knows all things, and his infinite truthfulness. Because God, we say it in the act of faith, God can neither deceive nor be deceived. And to that kind of contradiction, to say that a square is a circle or a circle is a square, would be to deceive, if it were possible. And that would be an imperfection. And so again, we have to throw it all out. There's no argument there. So next one, God is omniscient. He knows all things. He knows, therefore, whether I am going to be saved or lost. Right? What, therefore, is the use of my striving for my own salvation? Now, come on. I know you can answer this one. Yes?
You can't exactly go to heaven or hell until you've actually earned it.
Oh. But God knows where you're going to go, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you just say, okay, I'll just you send me to the right place? Would you actually accept that when you stood in, when you faced him in judgment, and you said, well, I decided when you were, I saw how your life was going to be, and, you're born, and then all of a sudden you're in judgment, and all the middle place is missing. He says, well, I saw when you were born that you were going to do this, 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 and you're going to earn hell. So that's where you're going. Would that make you happy? No. That's like kids in school. I say, they're going to take a test. The test is not for me. For me to know what you know, I already know what you know. If I'm a good teacher, I don't need to give any of my students any tests. And I could tell them that, and they would love that idea. What's the point of the test then? It's not for me to know whether you know the information. What's the point of the test? For you to know that you know the information, and for your parents to know what you don't know. I already know it. I know you haven't been doing your homework, but your parents need to understand that you've been sloughing off, or you don't understand this. The same with us. He knows that what our life will be like, but he gives us free will, and he will not interfere with that. We have to make the choices. And then when we stand before him, we understand how we got there. So we all know, if somebody were to give that argument, you could go through that, but you could also say, we know this to be true, that I can be saved if I want to be saved, if I will it, and if I carry out all that is required to get to heaven through God's grace, I can be saved. But again, it's me, my free will. This is certain, and this is sufficient. God's knowledge does not affect my free will. It doesn't change anything. Whether he knows that I'm going to go to heaven or to hell, it's not going to change a thing. God doesn't force me. He wants me to save my soul. He gives me every possible help along the way. But he won't do it for me, because that would be to take away my free will. The analogy is something along the lines of a football team who's got a big game tomorrow, and they get together and they say, well, God already knows whether we're going to win or lose, so there's no point in us playing. Yeah, how do you think that's going to go over with the fans especially? No. Yes, God does know the result, but you have to do it. Okay, so God knows, and you know that you will infallibly be saved if you're diligent in the matter of working out your salvation. You must be saved. You must be saved. There is no question. You must be saved if, and that's a big if you avoid sin and you know, love, and serve God and are a worthy member of the true church. If you do that, there's no question. You will be saved. There's no doubt. And God knows that. You just need to know it. And you can avoid going to seances and fortune tellers and these people you call up can tell you your fortune over the phone. This is a done deal. You will go to heaven if you do that. If you strive to avoid sin and you know, love, and serve God the way He wants you to do it, and are a worthy member of the true church. There is no question. Now, my question is, do you have any questions? Nope. Everybody understood everything. Either I'm a great teacher, or you just don't want to ask questions. I have to admit, this book by Father Glenn is very good. He's very very careful and very exact in his analysis of things. We used it in high school, and I think it's used in colleges and it's used in seminaries. It's really that good. So he does break everything down very well. It is easy for me to teach you from it because he's already done all the work. So next Sunday, of course, we won't be having class because of the mission and St. Nicholas coming, and I won't be here anyway because my sister is having operation for breast cancer, and I told her I would be there with her. She's afraid. The doctor says it's an in and out operation. But her husband went in for an operation on his leg 40 years ago and never came out of it. It doesn't. It's a real simple operation on your leg, and you die. Anesthesia, you can die. So she's afraid. So I told her I would be there for her. So keep her in your prayers on Wednesday. That's when the operation is, and I'll be back. I'll go to mass at her church on Sunday and be back from Sunday night. So so I won't be here next Sunday, but then we won't be having class anyway next Sunday because of everything else going on. But I'll see you the week after, and the week after we'll start on God's plan in creation. How we've been talking about God. Now we need to see how that applies, how God, all that we know about God, how it applies to creation, to us. Okay.